I believe so strongly in what I'm doing, and I'm so attached to the outcome of what I'm doing that is the priority, and anything else that comes into my life has to complement that, because I'm not quite where I want to be yet.
Hi Loui. Tell us a bit about your background and how you came to be in the F&B industry.
I think like most people, I came into hospitality by accident. I actually started in nightlife. So I was running events in nightclubs, and I was really interested in just giving people great experiences and wanted to have my own experiences as well. And when those experiences that I wanted to have didn't exist, I chose to try and create them. And so yeah, I started in putting on events in nightclubs when I was a teenager. And then in my early 20s, I managed to get my own nightclub, did a few of those, and quickly realised that a 22-year-old in charge of a nightclub is a recipe for disaster. So had a lot of early lessons with nightlife, and then around the age of 24, 25, I went plant-based. I adopted a vegan diet, and at that time there wasn't a lot on offer for plant-based food, at least plant-based food that would appeal to a wider audience and the kind of place that I'd like to go. And I think I love the philosophy that if what you want doesn't exist, create it. And so that led me to opening my first restaurant, and the first restaurant was effectively the kind of restaurant that I would want to go to.
So now tell me a bit about your current business.
Sure, so the current business is called Game Changers. We are a hospitality investment and management company. So we have a number of brands in our portfolio. We operate and license our brands, so London, UAE and North America. And the idea of Game Changers, it was actually born during the pandemic, where we saw there was a real opportunity with amazing locations in London that we could access a lot cheaper than we'd be able to in a normal market. There was an abundance of talented chefs and restaurateurs who maybe hadn't had the opportunity before to bring concepts and dreams of theirs to life. And so we went out, we raised some money, we were able to then support these chefs and restaurateurs, and I was one of those restaurateurs, but I folded in some of my concepts that I developed into the company. And we started opening locations for these brands in London, and very quickly managed to move these brands into other markets. So we're able to open some of our concepts in Dubai and the UAE, currently opening sites in North America, and we have sites in London for these brands as well. So it's all been very, very fast. I previously had concepts that were already open, but then for me, the benefit of bringing them into this group was that I would have the support of a central infrastructure that could essentially benefit all the brands in the group. So central operation support, supply chain, training, marketing. And it's really this kind of symbiotic relationship between the central management company and the brands. And it's been great to be able to help other restaurateurs and chefs to bring their brands to life as well. And
you say we, how big is this business now?
The business is fairly large in a quick space of time. So it's kind of the brainchild of my business partner, who brought me into it and then started to bring other people into it. And it was very organic. It started with who do we know, what are they doing? And it was very, very organic in terms of how it grew. And we just leveraged our existing relationships, all of us combined. And now we have a central office team in London. And then obviously the brands that are outside of the UK typically work on a franchise or a license agreement.
What would you say has been your biggest challenge in the industry?
Ooh, my biggest challenge, probably opening a vegan restaurant in a time when veganism wasn't popular. And not only was it not popular, it was hated by some people. I opened my first restaurant in Norfolk, which is predominantly of an agricultural heritage. It's a very strong agricultural community there, lots of farming, and typically tracks a few years behind London. So when I opened the UK's largest vegan restaurant there 4 years ago, it's safe to say that there wasn't too many vegans. So we had to very quickly find a way to popularise plant-based food with people who wouldn't ever consider themselves plant-based. And it was a really enjoyable challenge as a marketeer by trade, to try and find a way to communicate the benefits of plant-based food and our restaurant to people who were not only unwilling to come in, but sometimes positively against coming in. So that was a real challenge. And I would also say navigating the pandemic with young and growing brands, managing large teams, lots of people that are very much reliant on the businesses for their livelihood, making sure to manage both the people side of it, the business side of it, where some landlords were amazing and were supportive, others not so much. How do we navigate cash flow? How do we work with suppliers? How do we work with our teams? How do we pivot to adapt the business so that we can continue to trade and meet the needs of customers? So I think for many people in hospitality, COVID was a challenging time in those respects. But equally, it brought out lots of amazing creativity, and we were able to diversify the business in ways that continue to benefit it today.
So you're a vegan entrepreneur. Can you break that down for us a bit?
So I think the word entrepreneur is interesting because when I started in business in my teens, I didn't know of the word. Now it's kind of this aspirational title that everyone aspires to be an entrepreneur, but I think essentially an entrepreneur is someone that risks their own capital, time, energy on bringing an idea to life that they feel makes a positive impact on the world. And for me, the benefits that I found from adopting a plant-based diet, I wanted to share with more people. And so naturally that led me to finding a way to do that. And the vehicle for me doing that was restaurants. And having the experience in nightlife, I then had a recruitment company in hospitality, so I was used to dealing with hospitality people. It made sense for me to actualize that vision in the form of a restaurant. And it's been something that's just continued, and I've fell back in love with hospitality and the creativity of having an idea and bringing it to life, and then seeing people physically enjoy an idea that you've had is an amazing feeling.
And why do you think plant-based food has taken the world by storm?
I think the reason plant-based food is so popular now is out of a need for it to be. I think there's a growing awareness of the impact of a standard Western diet, and we have this growing global population who are not only growing in terms of size but in terms of prosperity, and they've been able to see the West enjoy these foods that have been popularized globally and now want to enjoy the same foods. The issue is the amount of resource it takes to produce a hamburger, for example, is so large that we end up using a huge amount of resources, and actually it's a really insufficient way of feeding large groups of people. And so I think people are starting to realize this. The help of the internet, podcasts, various forms of alternative media have highlighted some of these core issues that perhaps weren't immediately obvious previously. I also think that when you start to eat more plant-based foods and you eat more in line with natural foods that we were born to eat, let's say less processed foods, more natural fruits, vegetables, grains, legumes, beans, etc. You can't help but have more energy, feel better, skin improves, your sleep improves. And when you feel these benefits, it's something that you feel drawn to go back to. Equally, I would say in recent years, there's been a huge amount of support from prominent chefs, restaurateurs, brands who seeing the need to be more sustainable and recognizing people's growing awareness and how receptive people are becoming to these types of food have got on board, and the stigma around plant-based, maybe where it was 4 years ago, isn't the same as it is today. It's started to become cool, it's started to become something that young people are adopting at huge rates, and the trajectory is certainly upwards. So I think we're incredibly fortunate in London as well, that London's almost become this epicenter for plant-based food. And I think given the cultural diversity we have here and how plant-based lends itself to so many different cuisine types, we're really fortunate to have amazing restaurants and chefs, and it's become this kind of hub of activity in the plant-based space. So it's definitely a good market to be in.
But what got you into veganism at the start? Because you seem to be quite an early adopter.
What got me into veganism at the start, I didn't even know that I was going vegan, so to speak. So I was running a recruitment company in the daytime. I was still involved in nightlife in the evenings. I was working 7 days a week, all hours, and I was eating on the go all of the time. So breakfast, lunch and dinner out of the house. Don't think I ever cooked in the house I was in at that time. And I became very ill. I had chronic fatigue, burnout. I couldn't go into work, and I was looking for a way that I could give myself more energy and return to work. So I'm in the depths of YouTube, I'm looking for solutions to my fatigue problem. And what kept coming up was from a dietary perspective, to decrease sugar, to increase whole foods, and to decrease processed foods. So ultimately, those ideas fit into the box of plant-based. So I thought, let me try a plant-based diet for a month and see how I feel. So I cut out meat, dairy, eggs, fish, processed food, sugar, alcohol.
So pretty much your whole diet before?
Pretty much my whole diet before. And in a month, I just felt incredible. My energy came back, I was sleeping better, my training was better, I was recovering faster. And that led me to start to look into the environmental impact of a standard Western diet and looking at how much water was necessary to produce a hamburger, how these huge areas of the Amazon rainforest are being cleared for crop cultivation, the majority of which was going towards feeding animals, which we would then eat. And it just seemed like this ridiculous thing that was only getting worse. And it became evident to me very quickly that a change was needed and that ultimately a change would have to come at some point. And so I sought to try and popularise the eating of plant-based foods as soon as I could. And that ultimately led to me leaving the business that I'd started because we were mainly servicing restaurants that weren't selling these kind of foods. And I set out to work with plant-based brands, which at that time there wasn't very many of. So I kind of had no choice but to open my own place if that was what I wanted to pursue.
With all the dietary requirements circulating today, what's your approach when it comes to your restaurant's menus?
Yeah, it's a really good point. I think there's certainly more allergens and dietary needs than ever before, right? I don't think there's been a time in history when more people have been allergic to various food groups or having to be conscious about the foods that we eat. I think a lot of this is down to how processed a lot of foods have become. For us, the idea is that we use as much seasonal produce as possible. And the reason for this is I believe that nature is more intelligent than we give it credit for. And the vitamins, minerals, and energy that we need at that specific time of the year is locked inside the food that grows at that time of the year. And equally, when we're talking about sustainability, this isn't just around animal protein, this is about not flying food from the other side of the world. So if we're focused on seasonal produce, ultimately that becomes local produce, and if we can work with local growers, we know where the food comes from, there's traceability there, we're getting the nutritional benefit and we're getting the environmental benefit. So I think in keeping with that, it's keeping ingredients nice and clean, minimal, local, seasonal, and having an open dialogue with customers to understand what their needs are. I think this is something that historically at restaurants, you would go and you would eat whatever the chef felt like cooking that day. I think now we need to be much more in tune with our customers' needs. So if we're having people come in and they're asking for specific foods and it's happening regularly, we try and cater for those people based on their needs. And with neighbourhood restaurants in particular, that's incredibly important because these people are going to be coming in perhaps 2-3 times a week.
In the hospitality industry, which position do you see as the most underappreciated, unpraised?
Wow, it's a really good question. I think within hospitality in general, all positions are underpraised and underappreciated. I think the pandemic helped this to a degree because for the first time when people had that taken away from them, the ability to go and sit in a restaurant or a cafe, it became something that was appreciated a lot more. That being said, I do feel that particularly in the UK that it's hugely underappreciated and undervalued.
What would you like to change in your industry?
I would like to change how connected people are with the food they eat and with the people that are involved in making their food. I think for chefs a lot of the time, and I'm not a chef myself, but obviously I work with a lot of chefs, being so far away from people when they eat a lot of the time can remove the connection between the person that's eating the food and the person that's preparing the food. And a step beyond that, the person eating the food and the person growing the food. And I think this has become more important for people during COVID, is to understand where their food comes from. So I'd like to try and build a connection between the food that we eat and the people that eat it, and how we can think about incorporating that into the experience of dining out in a restaurant. I think that's really, really important. I think that's something that, as time has gone on, has been lost.
From the outside, it seems that you guys work crazy hours. I mean, you mentioned earlier you were working like 7 days a week. How do you balance your work and personal life?
I believe balance is only necessary when you view the two things as different. So for me, work is life, life is work. I choose to do what I do. It's not work. I don't have a cut-off point. So it's part of my life. It's what I would do if I wasn't getting paid for it. So there isn't a need to have a balance. If there's an email at 8 p.m. at night, I want to send it. It's not that I feel like I have to send it. But I also don't work consistently through the day. Maybe I'll go and train during the day. Maybe I'll go and have a sauna. Maybe I'll sit down and read for 30 minutes. But that also means that sometimes on a Saturday night or a Sunday afternoon, I'll be in the restaurants or I'll be around. So I think balance is potentially something that's needed when you're working, say, a 9 to 5 and you don't want to be there. But when you're doing something that you love and it's a passion, you're always on. That can be balanced with taking the odd holiday here and there if possible, but I had enough downtime during the pandemic. I don't want to sit around at the moment. I want to build things.
What one piece of advice would you like to give to your younger self, who I presume was in the nightclubs?
Just to keep going. I think resilience is a superpower. I think resilience is one of the most important traits that you can develop, because it is hard and you will fail and you'll get things wrong, but it's the ability to keep going and retain a positive attitude and outlook and remain optimistic going into what you're doing. And at times I've had doubt, or I've stopped, or thought that I can't do it. So I guess it would just be to keep the same attitude of optimism and belief and the same energy going into things, and to try and consciously make a positive impact on other people, knowing that you can walk into a room and if your energy is all the way up here, you're going to raise everyone else's energy. If you walk in and you're stressed, you're negative, no matter what's going on, that's going to bring everyone else down. And when you're leading a team, you can't show that. And that was particularly evident during COVID, right? You've got all these people that are reliant on you for their livelihood. If you come in and you're looking worried or anxious, they're going to feel worried or anxious. If you come in and say, right, we're going to try this thing, we're all going to get together, we're going to do this, you can lift people up. So yeah, I would say to ensure that you retain a positive attitude, and if you need to have those moments of, I just don't know how to deal with it, go and have it with someone that's disconnected from the business, so that's not being seen in the business in your day-to-day.
Oh, that's great advice. And now to people watching this, or just people in general who really like what you're saying and are thinking about maybe getting into the industry, is there any particular advice that you could offer those people?
Learn from great people. Learn from people who are where you want to be. That's maybe something that I didn't get right when I first opened the restaurant. I didn't have a mentor, so to speak. I didn't have anyone that I could look to. I have that now, and it's helped me hugely. But at the time, it was learning by trial and error, and I could have saved a hell of a lot of money and time had I been able to work with someone. If you don't have an immediately available mentor, maybe that's a consultant, maybe that's someone who's made the mistakes that you can pay to fast track that process of getting where you need to go. But I would definitely say to try and work it with someone that's been through it and has learned a lot of the hard lessons, because there's a benefit to naivety coming into it, because you can often do things in a way that's unique, but you're not held back or restricted by the way things have always been done. But equally, there's a lot of obvious things that I got wrong that I would have avoided had I had the help of someone who'd been there and done it.
What does the future look like for Loui Blake?
Ooh, I really don't know. I just follow my curiosity, and what I want changes so often that I can't sit here and say, I'm going to do this in 5 years or this in 10 years. All I will say is I want to just continue working on things that I believe in and with people that I like working with that make a positive impact. And whatever form that takes is the form that it takes. Right now, I'm really enjoying the restaurants. I'm really enjoying the product side of the business as well. I'm enjoying the challenge of working in different markets in different countries, and I hope to do more of that. But yeah, just to stay true to a purpose and finding purpose in the work and not letting it become about ego or money or anything else.
You've obviously chosen an untraditional career path. So how do you balance traditional relationships?
It's a really good question, and it's a really difficult one, and it's something that I've been battling with for quite a long time. I think firstly it's open and honest communication from the offset. So, and that's true of anything, it's showing up as your authentic self and communicating openly how you like to work, how you like to live, But before you can do that, you have to know yourself, right? So if I was to think, right, maybe I could finish at 6 every day, and maybe I could take weekends off, I know myself well enough to know that just will not happen, and I don't want that to happen. So if I tell that to someone else, that sets me up for failure, and then that person holds me by that standard, and when that doesn't happen, that person feels betrayed, feels lied to. I then feel annoyed because that person can't see who I am, but I've led them to a different belief, and therefore it's my fault. So I think it's about really open, honest dialogue from day one, and potentially finding someone that either understands how that is, or lives in a similar way themselves and has been through that same experience. So I think it's all about communication. It's all about honesty, and you also have to understand yourself where your priorities lie. Like, what is the priority? Because it's very difficult to have two things in competition with each other, because you end up not showing up for either one, right? So yeah, I think it's something that I'm continuously battling with, and I've had quite a few relationships end for that reason, because what I recognise in retrospect is I wasn't able to fully communicate the way that I live, and when I communicated something differently, it became an issue. And it's hard, it's really hard, because like you say, it's a non-traditional way of working. We're trying to fit these traditional ways of living into or around a way of working that isn't traditional, that is always on. And I think it takes a very, very strong person, or at least someone that has a similar lifestyle, to understand that.
Are you willing to compensate a little bit?
No.
There you have it.
I'm not willing to compromise. I say no. What I mean is that I believe so strongly in what I'm doing, and I'm so attached to the outcome of what I'm doing that is the priority, and anything else that comes into my life has to complement that, and has to complement what I'm doing, because I'm not quite where I want to be yet. And maybe when I am, that will be different. But at the moment, the compromise piece is not something that I'm willing to do.
Well, there you have it, guys. You get hospitality advice, romantic advice. What more could you want?